Well, I'm doing something that I've never had to do on a podcast before. So I recorded this episode with Joshua Shea. And then after I released it, I got a message on Facebook from somebody who kind of pointed out that the severity of his crimes might have been more significant, let's say, than he revealed. So went and did some research, which was a really important lesson for me because I realized if I want to step up this podcast and do it at a level that's truly professional, I need to be better at researching my guests. But regardless, what I found was super fucking disturbing. Um, so I took the podcast down and then I exchanged some emails with Josh, and I think I'm going to put it back up, but I'm going to put it back up with a link to some of the information about some of the crimes he committed, and then you can decide for yourself, because I actually think despite what happened, his message is important, and I think people need to hear it. And I had gotten really good feedback on the episode, so I just want to make sure that we're doing this with so people, all our eyes are wide open here. And um, so yeah, that's the new intro that I'm slapping on at the beginning of this podcast. Like I said, I'll include a link to some of the information about the crimes that Josh committed, and I will let you decide to take away what you will from this episode. But I think it's important not to get all wrapped up in the idea of what this guy did and therefore he should never be heard from again, because I think that's wrong. I think we need to give people a voice, and then let them share their message in the court of public opinion, basically, and then we can decide what to do with that. But just casting it into the shadows is not something I'm ever going to be supportive of, and I will not be running this podcast this way. So take what you will from that, and enjoy the episode or learn from the episode, because again, I think the message is important, and I actually think that what he's trying to do is do some good after after the damage that he's done. So, but again, I'll leave that up to your discretion. I'm not trying to be naive about it. I just I don't know. Okay, I guess I'll stop rambling now. You listen to the episode, you decide, and if you absolutely fucking hate what I've done, let me know. And if you are supportive of it, let me know that too. And if you don't give a flying fuck, well, I guess you probably won't email me. But let me know either way. I would love to hear your feedback, guys. Thanks. Wow, I just wrapped up an amazing conversation with Josh Shea, and what a story, man! It is totally a riches to rags to, Phoenix rising from the ashes type of story that I love so much. I've talked about that a million times. But Josh dealt with a lot of mental health issues and addiction for a lot of his life, alcohol addiction and pornography addiction. And that's what he is. This is what we talk about a lot in the podcast. And he gives so much insight and about not just pornography, but about addiction and mental health issues. And he was a very, very successful guy. He was a magazine publisher, a very popular magazine. He lived in Maine. He was called one of the next 10 people shaping Maine's economy. And he was very well known, except he was developing and kind of going down the rabbit hole of a terrible addiction to alcohol and pornography. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And as his mental health issues struggled and his business started to struggle, he went way down the rabbit hole. And he eventually ended up crossing the line, let's say, into illegality, being arrested and spending 6 months in jail. And he is so, forthcoming about his story, about the things that he did, and how pornography is the addiction that nobody talks about. And we talk about what it was like when we were kids and what it's like for kids now, and, the dangers of how it impacts relationships, and how it can just go way over the top without you even realizing it. That's such a common thing with addiction. It's part of my own story as well. But man, we have such a powerful ability to rationalize our shitty behavior that it can be really hard to see kind of the forest through the trees or whatever, and see how far down we've gone. So Josh's story and his book that he just released, which I'll link to in the show notes page, are going to help a ton of people. And it's just another one of these awesome stories where a man is using what, his mistakes and source of shame and guilt and regret to be a massive service to other people and to make a positive difference in the world. And I will always continue to feature those people on the Mental Health Warriors podcast, because I love
talking to them. I love the courage. I love the insights and the honesty. And I love the commitment to living, this new chapter in their lives in the service of other people. So thanks to Josh. Man, I loved this conversation, and I hope and will do what I need to do in order to help you, to help you have a successful book launch. So keep up the great work, brother. Stay in touch. And it's nice to call you a friend of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. And I wish you nothing but success. Enjoy the show.
Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Hey, Josh, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah, I really, how did you reached out to me to inquire about being a guest. How did you, I'm just curious how you came across the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Well, obviously, when I was looking to promote this book, there's the obvious just go with porn, just go with addiction, but mental health is a huge part of my story. I was 21 years old, diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. Come 24, 25, we put the bipolar pin in that. And as I was going through the legal issues that I know we'll discuss, I was diagnosed PTSD. And so my entire life and the rise and fall of me professionally, which is in my book, so much of it has to do with mental health. And I really try to make that an important part of my conversation. So as I was looking for mental health blogs, mental health podcasts, there's a certain way I want to share my story. I don't want it to be sensationalized. I don't want to somehow degrade myself. And I listen to some of your podcasts, and I'm more of a voracious reader. I read a lot of the articles and blog postings on your site, and it just seemed like this would be a good match.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're here. So you mentioned you were diagnosed with anxiety disorder and then bipolar, which sounds a lot like the story of my first wife. And one thing I'm curious about is where did that come from? Did you experience any kind of trauma when you were a kid, or did that just, usually it doesn't come from nowhere.
Right. I did experience trauma. I had a caregiver, my babysitter, who I was with from birth to about 9 years old. I would go there first when my parents were at school or when they were at their jobs. And then once I started going to school, I'd go there just after school. In those years between 3 and 6, I have remembered probably about a dozen incidents involving mental cruelty, emotional cruelty, and some physical and sexual cruelty. I hesitate to go all the way to call it abuse. Maybe that's just a coping mechanism for myself. But I know people with severe abuse stories, and I don't want to say that my story rises to that level. But there was a lot of inappropriateness and a lot of bad things going on in that home. That's where I developed my survival skills and my coping skills. And they were not, they might have been the good coping skills of a 4-year-old child, but they weren't down the road. And I had a rough time in life. I was very popular, I've been diagnosed with a bit of a narcissist issue. So I always made sure people knew who I was, and I made sure that I was, trying to run the show whenever I could. But inside, I've always had huge amounts of not shyness, but just being afraid of people, being scared to death to let people know who I was, and just trying to do anything I could to be happy. When I got into my late teens, early 20s, I ended up quitting college 3 times. I just couldn't get happy, and I thought that I thought I had a depression problem. What I found out after a lot of talking and a lot of research was that it was actually bipolar. My normal was a very manic state. I didn't recognize that. The only thing I ever recognized as wrong was the depression. So I was treated for depression. I was treated for anxiety while the manic went untreated for probably about 4 years after being diagnosed with generalized anxiety. And it was funny because I saw a lot of mental health professionals. It was actually my PCP, who has known me since I was a kid, who said, I'd like you to read some of this material. And it was a list of behaviors and symptoms of people with bipolar, and just things like, spending money wildly, and, being able to stay up for 3 days at a time and not feeling it. Nothing ever occurred to me that was part of a mental health issue, but bipolar really fit. And an ironic little thing, once I was put on the proper medication for bipolar, I never smoked marijuana again.
Interesting. So did you find, like, see, there's a couple things there I'd like to get into. I think that, like, when you were experiencing these, manic phases, were you manic to the point where you were doing a lot of destructive things in your life? Because what I've seen just from my own personal experience with Cindy, my first wife, is that, when it's taken to an extreme, like when it's really, really bad, I mean, the destruction you can wreak is incredible. But if, when it's more, say, hypomanic and, it's not quite as intense, man, you can be incredibly charismatic and incredibly creative, and have like your ideas are bigger and all that. I mean, is that something you experienced too? And
that's perfect way to explain it. One of the first times I sat down with a psychiatrist to talk about which meds would be best to put me on, I told him flat out, I don't know why you're putting me on meds. It's the rest of you who need to be put on meds to feel the way that I do, because I get 20 hours a day of nothing but energy and adrenaline. I am so creative. I'm so productive. I don't know why I would want to put a wet blanket on top of this and slow it down. But like you said, there is a downside to it. I was somebody who, on a Thursday afternoon, if I was checking my email and a pop-up ad showed up for Expedia and said, hey, you can get to Amsterdam or London or Germany tonight for $99, I would think nothing of doing that. And jumping on a plane and flying to Europe and telling nobody I was there. And, there were a few times where I would be sitting in a cafe, in Amsterdam or somewhere, just think to myself, oh my God, if I was to have a massive heart attack and die right now, nobody would know. Nobody would know. Why the heck is he in Europe? And there are other things, such as one time I was driving down a very busy highway in Massachusetts, ironically on my way to the airport, and there was a massive car crash, probably about 100 yards in front of me, and I just drove straight through it. I didn't stop. I didn't help. I didn't try to do anything because I had a plane to catch. I couldn't be bothered by stopping and doing that kind of thing. And I look back now and think just how crazy that was. And I hope that, somebody stopped right away and my neglect didn't, cause the situation to be worse. But there were lots of those situations where it was much more of impulsive than destructive. Of course, sometimes impulsive blows up in your face, but there wasn't as much destructive as it just was, I'm going to live the life I want, as hard as I want, when I want. and nothing's going to stop me because I am impervious to pain. And even worse, I'm impervious to any kind of consequences.
Did you actually believe you were impervious, or you just never really stopped to think through what the consequences might be?
I believe, well, and on a logical level, I could see that there were consequences, but there were never consequences I couldn't deal with. I learned early on, I think, that it was much easier to go ahead and do what I want and say sorry than ask for permission and be told no. The net
Oh my
gain,
God, maybe I'm
the net gain
bipolar
was
too.
just bigger if I did what I wanted to do and then had to repent a little bit afterwards.
Okay, gotcha. So another thing you mentioned was narcissism, and I think I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I have some not personal experience, but I have a friend who's got an ex-wife or a partner who's going through this with her ex-husband. And I never really knew what it was. And so as part of that, him and I have talked a lot about, narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder or whatever you want to call it. But man, it's something else. So, but I don't think a lot of people really know what it is. And one thing as you talk about it, I'd be curious to know is that, because what I've seen is that narcissistic people can be very powerful in the way that they manipulate people and dominate people. And it can be, I mean, I'm sure it can feel like a very effective way of being to get what it is that you think you want. It's at the expense of other people, but to the narcissist, they don't really give a shit about that, right?
No, absolutely not. And this is a relatively new diagnosis for me, but I feel like this fits so well. I feel like when I was first presented with the symptoms and behaviors of bipolar disorder, and it fit like a glove, the narcissistic personality disorder symptoms and behaviors absolutely fit like a glove. The excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, my sense of entitlement that I always, had inside of me, an ability to handle any criticism. That absolutely fit the first 37, 38 years of my life. And it's interesting because over the last 4 years, while I've been in recovery, I've been taming a lot of these behaviors and recognizing that they are problems and dealing with the symptoms. In the last couple of weeks, with this book coming out and doing promotion and media for it, I feel a lot of those little nagging symptoms hitting me. And it makes me very conflicted because I have a sense of admiration right now. You're the one who is talking to me on your podcast, not the other way around. I'm the special guest everywhere right now. It's something that I clearly have, and I'm glad it was diagnosed so late because I can accept the diagnosis. One of the ironic things about narcissistic personality disorder is almost no person accepts it the first time they're told. And I know that I wouldn't have accepted it for a long time. It often comes years into therapy after a therapist really gets to know somebody. It's hard to diagnose somebody with this because there's usually so much more on the surface. And this is one of those much deeper personality disorders.
So as you get this diagnosis and accept it, what are some of the ways that you work to overcome it or move past it? And then when you are in a situation like you mentioned, like feeling like you're an important guy here, being on people's podcasts and all that kind of stuff, like, and you notice yourself slipping into those thought patterns, like what are some of the tools or tactics you use to, maybe bring yourself back to some kind of baseline?
Well, number one, my family helps. The immediate family that I live with, they always know how to keep me in check. They don't put me on a pedestal. They know my issues. They understand them. They help with them, but they don't play into them. They are not enablers. So that's a good thing, is to not be around that. The other thing that I try to do is exercise more empathy. That's one of the big things for people with narcissistic personality disorder is a lack of empathy or an ability to simply shut it off. And then I try to recognize that I'm doing multiple things here with the promotion of my book, and I can recognize that I am the most important thing is to help people, and I really truly believe that. Um, if I'm the one who's talking, that's just because I'm the one who's talking. There is nothing special about me. I am right now sitting in my pajamas in front of my computer in cold Maine, talking about my mental health. This is not a pedestal to stand on. This is not something that other people are striving for. This might make me unique, but it doesn't make me special. I really have to just sit there and exercise some cognitive behavioral therapy and look at my situation and say, yeah, there's don't build this into something it's not. Don't This is not an ego trip. This is not a situation where you're going to be, world famous for doing this. Try to help some people. And I know that I've been able to help some people. I've got some really nice emails over the last couple of weeks. And it's just a matter of, like, my bipolar disorder, looking at it and keeping it in check. It's going to be something that's a lifelong struggle, and we are looking at tweaking my medication slightly. Uh, but I also go back to, and my therapist is a real big believer in this idea, is that you walk through the door who you are, and you walk out the door who you are. Narcissistic personality disorder is a label, just like PTSD is a label, just like bipolar is a label, just like any of these other diagnoses are labels. They're important to have. They're important to be able to know how to treat somebody. But I've been told I have detachment disorders, compulsion disorders. You know, it's a gray area, and what I have to do is look at myself as a whole and look at my emotions, look at my thoughts, and analyze them and understand if they're proper, if they're healthy, and if they may not be, to be very aware and try to make changes.
Yeah, I love that. God, I'm listening to you. I'm like, how many labels can you put on a person, right? Because I feel like I talk to people in the mental health warriors community all the time, and I have a good friend of mine who's like this, but I just see, when I say like this, I mean people who are stuck in thought patterns for whatever reasons. There's a million different reasons people develop these ways of thinking and these beliefs that they hold, but they get stuck in them. And a lot of times they don't have enough self-awareness to realize what's causing them, that they do in fact have some power over them. And it takes some intention, again, and self-awareness to be able to intervene and start to create new, I guess, thought pathways. But it is totally possible. So, whether you need to label somebody with a bunch of labels in order to get them to see that that's possible or what, I'm not sure. But I've just seen so many people be able to turn their life around by actually just realizing that they're way more powerful in shaping their own thoughts and their own actions as a result of those thoughts than they think they are.
Well, and I get, after being at 2 inpatient rehabs, doing a lot of group therapy, and then being a pretty active member of the blogging community. I think that there is a section of people who find mental health issues, or find living with mental health issues, somewhat romantic, uh, somewhat. I don't want to say defining, but it's what they live in. It's what they wallow in. It's how they define themselves. There's no real desire to even get better. They encourage more labels thrown on them. It's one of those things where it's like everybody's journey is their own, but to me, you try to take care of your physical health. You need to try to take care of your mental health. I wouldn't be flailing around. Woe is me. I have diabetes. That's who I am. I have diabetes. I'm not going to be that way with bipolar. I'm not going to be that way with PTSD. I'm not going to be that way with anything you want to throw the label on me. I This is a little bit. I've had some debate with people about this. I am at the point where I almost welcome triggers to come my way, because the triggers are what make me stronger. Yes, I could fall. I still have trouble being in an airport because I spent 20 years drunk in airports. And me being sober in an airport is super challenging. There are a lot of people who would avoid airports because of that. I would rather be at the airport and conquer it. That's my personality type. You can label me, you can put up obstacles in my way, but I'm a problem solver. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to, if not get better, I'm going to learn how to manage this.
So I can totally, what you're saying makes perfect sense to me, but what's the debate that you have with people?
A lot of people seem to believe that you should avoid your triggers or walk into them with little tiny baby steps and treat them as if they're some kind of monster. And I don't think that's how we learn to deal with our triggers and how we put them into our lives. I think that triggers are unresolved issues. Triggers are places that need work. And I think that they are wonderful indicators of places that need work. I try to be hypersensitive to triggers now. If I'm watching a television show and there's a beautiful actress and I think to myself, oh my God, I want to find out what she looks like naked. I've got to jump onto one of these websites. And that's what I used to do 5-6 years ago. If there was a good looking woman on TV, I'd immediately jump to one of those celebrity nudity websites. I still get triggered that way, but I don't go to those websites. And I not that I'm glad I'm triggered, but it's a reminder that I have to be very diligent when it comes to my addictions and when it comes to my mental health. And I think that if I ignored that, didn't look at the situation, I could just avoid TV entirely. Why would I want to do that? It's not my way of doing things. And some people, I guess, need to be treated with kid gloves and need to treat themselves with kid gloves. And I'm not one of those people.
That is fascinating to me. This is actually a topic I've always wondered about because there's a lot of people, especially in the first responder community, because I deal with a lot of those people. And again, I only know their stories from the perspective that I know them from, but I see a lot of that where, there's specific traumatic events that happens and the people are triggered and there's it seems to me to be a significant amount of effort put into avoiding those triggers. So it's interesting to hear your point of view, and I can see why that would cause the odd debate. So let's go back to some of your what the book is about and your story. So I guess as you're growing up, did the drinking develop as a way of coping with some of the anxiety and mental health issues you were feeling? Because I've seen that so often. I mean, even for me, when I was, trying to deal with the trauma of my wife's sickness and death, I mean, that's why I drank. I didn't understand at all. That's why I was, abusing alcohol so heavily. But was that the reason for you?
I'm still working on that. Because I can tell you, both with alcohol and with pornography, discovering them in my early teens, it was just like I found something. This is almost weird, like I found my calling. Somebody who's good at baseball, and that's what they're going to devote their life to, or somebody who decides they want to play the cello, and that's what they're going to devote their life to. The first time that I felt a buzz with alcohol at a cousin's wedding when I was probably 14 years old, I knew I found something. The first time and this was actually when I was 8 or 9 years old, that a cousin showed me some hardcore pornography, I knew I had found something that was just special, that this was going to help me get through life. This was going to get me through the hard times. And I knew that from day one. I mentioned in my book that about 5 years, it probably was 5 years after I saw my first hardcore pornography, that I got to see it again. And it was the exact same feeling. It was a feeling of relief. It was a feeling of release. It was something that this is going to help me. This is a wonderful thing that's going to help me. And alcohol was the exact same way. I recognized that alcohol was more of could be more of a rabbit hole to go down because of the alcoholism that's in my family. I know that, I heard plenty of negative stories related with alcohol. Nobody ever talks about pornography. Nobody did back then. Very few people do now. Hence the title of my book, The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About. I went a very long time engaging in a lot of pornography, not truly understanding why, and not even recognizing it as a problem, because everybody knows about alcoholism, everybody knows about addiction, everybody knows about AA. Never even thought about the pornography side of things. So going all the way back, it was just something that was amazingly special. I don't know if it was necessarily to cope. I don't know if it was necessarily to get through bad situations. I just knew that it was always there, and it always made me feel better.
How did you look at the kids today. I mean, the access to porn is so pervasive, but I mean, how did you access it back then? Because I can remember being in grade 9, which is fucking creepy because my daughter's in grade 9. But regardless, I can remember being at my buddy's house, and his dad had this like thing, this case, or what do you call it? Like some kind of container under his bed with all these like Swedish erotica porns. And we'd get home after school and we put them on the Betamax machine in the living room, and we'd sit there and watch them until he pulled in the driveway, at which point we like completely, panic and run upstairs and try to get it all put away before he came home. So that was about my exposure to it. But other than that, and shoplifting Penthouse and Hustler every once in a while, I mean, there wasn't really any easy access to it. So how did you you're what, 41 right now?
Yeah, 41.
Yeah. So I'm 44, so almost 45. So I mean, we're basically the same generation. So how did you access it?
I found when I was 13 or 14 years old, I was allowed to rent videos at this one store. They let me do it. And I basically, over the course of a week or two, started getting progressively raunchier and dirtier with what I was renting. At first, I was able to rent, a obviously erotic independent film. And then I was able to rent one of those Playboy calendar videos. And then I was able to get myself into the back room and find some real hardcore pornography. And every video store had that back room. And at this one, they didn't care that I went there and would rent 2 or 3 tapes. So from an early age, 13, 14 years old, I mean, before I could drive, I would literally ride my bike 1.5 miles to the video store, get some pornography, put it into my backpack, and then just bike home as fast as I could.
Wow. That's
and it's clearly a red flag now, but back then it was just a hobby. This is what I do. This is what I do after school. You go play baseball, you go play the cello. I come home and watch porn. We all have our thing. That's mine.
Well, and I think it's funny you say that, because that's absolutely true of people who are that age. I mean, I was the same way, and I think that's one of the wonderful benefits that a parent can provide to a child, is to give them some insight about the implications of their actions beyond the horizon that they're able to think about it. I mean, my daughter's 14 and 13, or 14 and almost 13 years old, and they can't like realistically project very far into the future. Why would they be able to do that? They don't have any life experience to see the long-term impacts of the decisions they make. So I think as a parent, that's one of the great gifts we can give our kids. But I was the same way, man. I mean, it's all about living in this particular moment, and you can't see what you're setting yourself up for in the future.
Well, and to dovetail off that, that's really why I think we need to have a discussion about porn addiction in society, because we can talk about, everybody remembers being 12 years old and 16 years old and 21 years old and making mistakes you wish that you could go back and change, and you're going to try to help the next generation. But right now, we're living in a time where, our generation was the very last one to get hooked on non-internet porn. Now you've got people who are leaving college, settling into jobs, who don't remember a world before the internet. We are now finding out what happens when, You tell a kid now, get on your bike and ride 3 miles back and forth to get pornography, they'd laugh at you because it takes about 12 keystrokes and a clear browser history when you're done.
Yeah.
And we are now starting to see the fallout of 20 years of this. 1 out of 3 men under the age of 30 believes they have a pornography addiction. That wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago. You didn't see the instances of arrests for child pornography that there 20 years ago that you see now. The internet is having a massive impact on pornography, on sexuality. And if we don't, as a society, start recognizing this, we're going to be in trouble. I talk about a little bit about the opioid crisis, and I don't compare porn addiction or alcohol addiction to the physical ravages of opioids. But you can go back to the late 1960s and watch episodes of Dragnet where they're talking about the heroin problem. You can go back 20, 25 years to some of Eminem's first music where he's talking about abusing Vicodin. It's not like we didn't know the opioid crisis was coming. We've had 2 generations to see it coming. I'm trying to tell people right now that we are going to have a massive critical crisis when it comes to pornography addiction and how it affects our society if we don't start dealing with it soon. Because that 1 out of 3 guys under 30, well, 20 years from now, it's going to be under 50. And 40 years from now, it's going to be under 70. And what's going to happen when those statistics increase and half of our male population is addicted to pornography? Can you imagine that kind of world?
I'm not sure that I can actually. Yeah, that's sobering to think about. And another thing you said, just completely basically unrelated, but has Eminem actually been around for 25 years? Because I just felt really old when you said that.
Yeah, it's some of his underground stuff. You go back to like My Name Is, I believe that was 1998. So yeah,
Wow.
20 years for Eminem as a mainstream big deal recording artist, but you can find his underground stuff that's approaching 25 years old.
Wow, that's crazy. You've got an addiction to alcohol, you've got a porn addiction, or at least well, I guess it is a porn addiction by this point. But it still, you create that what on the surface appears to be a really successful life. So you're married, you got a great wife, you've got 2 kids. Like, what was that like? Like, how did you reconcile all that? Because I know from personal experience how powerful rationalization can be. It's crazy what people are able, including myself, are able to rationalize when they're not willing to confront an issue, and how we can we can pretend we're compartmentalizing all this stuff. But like, what was your relationship like, and how did you separate those 2 things in a way that made sense to you?
Well, you use the word compartmentalize, and that's the one that I've always used. Right at the probably height of my craziness, there was the Josh who was the father and the husband. That wasn't a great Josh at that time, but I was a father and a husband in one box. I was a magazine publisher in another box. I was a city councilor in another box. And I made sure that the boxes didn't interact. And between times, I would use alcohol or pornography differently in each box. I made sure they were part of the life, but I'd use it differently in each box. I didn't look for porn at work. I ran the place. I could have looked at porn all day long, but I didn't. That wasn't part of the work Josh. The work Josh was a massive drinker. I had no problem having a beer at my desk. When I was a city councilor, I can look back at city council videos from 5-6 years ago. I don't know what I'm talking about. I was just so good at compartmentalizing, so good at I don't know if it was to be detaching, but to just play the character who I was at the time. My wife told me not too long ago, she remembers me actually leaving the house saying things like, okay, time to go play city councilor. Okay, time to go play good citizen. Okay, time to go play film festival director, as if I was putting on a mask to leave the house. And when you wear so many masks, you get very good at manipulating, you get very good at hiding. And I didn't even really feel like at that point I was hiding my alcoholism or I was hiding my porn addiction. It was just part of the compartmentalizing. And it didn't feel weird. It just felt like part of my life. I didn't feel like I was sneaking around doing anything. I looked at porn late at night after everybody had gone to bed, and that's just when I looked at porn. So, I don't have a problem because it's not affecting my work. I don't have a problem because it's not affecting my relationships. Well, it was affecting all of those things. Compartmentalizing is an absolute fantasy. But that's what I thought I was doing, and for years I kidded myself that I was handling it very well.
And did you have moments of like where that sort of those compartments broke down when you were, racked with guilt, or, and then you quickly went back into the mode you were always used to? Because that's the kind of stuff that happened to me. I mean, I think in my heart, I knew what I was doing was not, was needed to change. I just didn't have the courage to face it. But then I would snap out, quote, snap out of it and go back to the way I just knew how to be. Like, did you experience those kind of moments?
Yeah, and the eventual fall was when I couldn't snap back. When my relationships really started to struggle with my wife and kids, when my business started to struggle, and I didn't know how to handle that. I stupidly, and I say that this is probably the biggest factor in my downfall. I pulled myself off my medication, believing that the only way to save my business was to tap into my manic side because it had always been there for me before. Well, I take away my meds. Suddenly, I'm drinking a lot more to cope. Suddenly, looking at porn for an hour in the middle of the night becomes 2 hours. Suddenly, it makes the leap over to chat rooms and talking to real people. Suddenly, I'm not getting to work on time in the morning because I'm still crashed from being up all night trying to cope. That's ultimately what brought me down, was the inability to snap back anymore. And if it wasn't for the police showing up at my door that one day, I give even odds that I'd be dead right now. I needed a massive intervention because I had so many different areas of my life collapsing at one time while my addictions were rising, that it was going to be deadly. And while it obviously was scary when it happened, I look back now and think that those police officers showing up at the door was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring that part of the story. But I wanted to ask you before that, like, what so you had gotten to, quite a degree of success being the way that you were, having these addictions and these, the man that you are. What was it that made the wheels, like what were some of the things that happened or some of the behaviors you did or that started to make the wheels come off as as you started to decline? Like what were some of those things?
Well, there were things like when my magazine was in Central Maine. It was a high profile, glossy lifestyle publication. Central Maine had never seen anything like that before. So I was deemed a overnight success. Even though I'd been in journalism for 15 years to that point, I was deemed an overnight success starting this magazine. I won every award in town. Everybody wanted to interview me. This played into my narcissism, like pouring gasoline on a fire. Well, after everybody wanted to be a part of the magazine. The advertising was fantastic as far as the revenue went. Well, after 3 or 4 years, all of these businesses start to be able to look at their data and determine if advertising is working for you. As much as I could still try to play we're the scrappy new magazine, after 3 or 4 years, you're not the new hip thing anymore. So there was a natural downturn in our business, and I didn't know how to handle that. I'm not a very good business person. I was just trying to, kind of hold the reins of the crazy horse as it was going up. As it was going down, I had no idea what to do. So that started to tap into my anxiety. That started to tap into my depression. And Yeah, it was scary because that was, I think, the start of my bad decision making. When I said to myself, well, the times of great success in my life have been when I haven't been on medication, when I have been allowed to use my manic side. Now, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. But that was the story that I told myself at that point because I was grasping at straws to try to find something that would work for me. So when I pulled myself off of my mental health meds, it wasn't very long before I needed to drink more and I needed to look at more porn to cope with everything that was happening in my day. Losing control of my life because I defined myself based on my job. I worked 100 hours a week. I defined myself based on how people in outside society defined me. That was the most important thing to me. And when those wheels started to fall off that bus, I didn't know what to do. I was at such a loss. I tried to keep faking it, but suddenly I'm only showering every 2 or 3 days because I'm so depressed. And the magazine is coming out 4 or 5 days later than it should because I'm so depressed. And I'm not quite recognizing this at the time because I'm just trying to numb everything with alcohol and with porn. And it couldn't keep going the way that it was. Something was going to break. And I knew that. I had no idea how to fix it at all. I just knew something was going to break if something didn't happen to change my life.
What did your wife and kids think? I don't know how old your kids were at the time, but what did your family think was happening at this time?
At this time, I think that they had largely checked out from me. And I don't mean that in a bad way for them. I had been so neglectful. I had made so many promises that I didn't keep. I was such a waste of space around the house. I couldn't be bothered to pick up a dish. I couldn't be bothered to take out the trash. I had put myself on such a high pedestal. I was insufferable being around. And then you throw on top of that just the depression and generally, not being a good person. I think, most people, I think at this point, who dealt with me business-wise thought I was an amazing asshole. They at towards the last 5-6 months, I think that they, much like my business partners, much like many other people, for their own health, for their own well-being, pulled back a little bit because I can see now how many people tried to intervene along the way. I can see now how many people tried to say, "Hey, hold on. You're working too much. You're drinking too much. You're becoming difficult to work with." There were all of these signs, and that's one of the big things in the book that I talk about is all of the warning signs that I wouldn't heed because I thought I was Superman. People tried. My wife tried. My kids tried. My business partners tried. My parents tried. The day before I was arrested, my mother said to me, "You look like you're going to die. You do not look healthy whatsoever." And I told her I was working on our film festival that we were putting on. I founded a film festival in Central Maine, and I just blamed that. But she was absolutely right. I looked like I was going to die. And I understand why people started pulling away because I was a lost cause.
Yeah, and that's what happens, right? Is I mean, well, that's what happened to my first wife, Cindy. I mean, she you are making decisions that have devastating real life consequences. And for her, she was so emotionally dysregulated pretty much all of the time. And she was, just in this total downward spiral for a number of years. And she had people, many, many people in her life that loved her and wanted to help her. But God, you can only do so much, and you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves, obviously. But at some point, everybody's got their own lives here. They've
Right.
got, jobs to go to, businesses to run, kids to raise, spouses to love, and they got to, for their own self protection and preservation, you've got to pull back. And ultimately what ends up happening so frequently is people who are in the most needed, the most need of help have no one left to help them. And I can see why suicide is, is an option for people in that situation, or why they feel like it's an option.
And I've had a lot of people ask me, is there anything that could have been done to turn you around? And once you hit that critical level, once you hit that critical place, there isn't anything. And I can't say there isn't anything. It takes a massive, massive intervention. I don't think that my family could have sat around and given me a typical intervention that I would have thought about, because I thought they were all crazy and all of their concerns about me were completely unfounded. It didn't make any sense to me, because I'm fine. I'm Superman. I've been Superman for 36, 37 years at this point. I appreciate your concern. Leave me the fuck alone. There was no helping me at that point. I needed to have the intervention of the law. I needed to have my life turned upside down in the blink of an eye. I needed to have massive, massive mental health, emotional health. I needed to go away and deal with this stuff. Thankfully, I was able to with rehab. And I'll also tell you, on top of it all, I think that the consequences of being arrested and ending up serving 6 months in jail, I think that was very good for me. I think that was very healthy for me. I think that consequences, which I never had in my life, now play a giant role in my life when I make decisions. Because I've learned that you do reach a point where you can't just say sorry and people will pat you on the head because you're charismatic and let you go on your way. It's tough for the people around you. One of the things in my acknowledgments in my book, I say, I thank my wife and kids, and I say that, they saw me through some of the most trying moments in my life, but I know I created some of the most trying moments in theirs. Hello?
Oh, sorry. I had me on mute because I was drinking some tea there.
Okay. Thought I lost you there.
No, we're good. So what did you end up getting arrested for, and how did that sequence of events play out?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, as with any addiction, it escalates and it escalates because you're not able to tap into the dopamine like you once were. The magazines and simple videos were fine for me when I was younger. Then, as I got older and got into the internet, well, I needed some different genres. Maybe it would be schoolgirl or cheerleaders or reality stuff. Whatever. It escalated and escalated and escalated. When it got to that critical phase when kind of my life was imploding, I moved over from just watching video clips to actually talking to women in chat rooms, peer-to-peer kind of stuff. And for many months, I would just, I sat there and, I guess I shouldn't say many months. For a couple of weeks, I sat there and I couldn't get any woman to stop and talk to me. So I was able to, through the help of a nefarious type of person online, he taught me how to play a video on my end. So if you and I were having a cam chat, you actually weren't seeing me. You were seeing the video of somebody who was much more attractive, younger, buff-looking guy. And suddenly I had all kinds of women stopping to talk. Between 1 and 3 in the morning, it's mostly women in their late 20s, early 30s. So at first it was just conversations, and it was really nice talking to somebody who didn't need something from me, be it family or coworker, somebody who just didn't need anything from me. And I could hide behind the facade of this person who I was presenting myself as online, but still work through a little bit of my issues. In some way, it was almost therapeutic. Well, fairly quickly, it turned sexual, where I would begin to manipulate a woman into taking off her top or maybe trying to do something sexual. And what I recognize now, and I think I even knew it then, is that it that wasn't about sexual gratification. When I wanted that, there was pornography fully available for me. Going online and talking to these women, women who otherwise wouldn't take off their top, for me to be able to manipulate them into doing that, that made me feel powerful. Despite the fact in my regular life, I was losing all of my power. I was losing all of my control. Between 1 and 3 or 1 and 4 in the morning, I could still control somebody online, and I could make them do what I wanted. And it was one of the opening scenes of my book talks about how I'm talking to a woman on one half of my computer screen who thinks she's talking to somebody else. And on the other half of my computer screen, every time she gives me a clue as to who she probably is, I'm researching it. And I'm building a profile of who she really is, so I can then take that information and seemingly come up out of nowhere and get her and build a rapport with her. I mean, it was grooming 101. And I got in trouble because I would, at the end of these conversations, if I was successful in making a woman do something that she perhaps wouldn't have otherwise, I would take a screen capture and I would throw that into a folder as a trophy. I was somebody who, not surprisingly, throughout life liked to collect trophies. And at some point, my good sense, or what little good sense I had left, completely vanished. And I started to talk to, I didn't start to check on ages like I should have. And I ended up talking to a teenager who looked like a fully developed woman. If I saw somebody who looked like a child, I would click away from them. But the way that biology works, there were women under 18 or girls under 18 who look like women. I had no problem, talking to them because I just wanted to see somebody who looked like a woman. Mm-hmm. About 5 months after I did this, the police showed up at the door and they knew what happened. And I had a couple screen captures of one girl. She turned out to be 14 years old, which blew my mind because she development wise didn't look 14 years old, but my mental health and the way that I had let myself go and my decision making was so faulty that as long as they look old enough, that was okay to me. When you have to follow the law. There's a very black and white line of 18 years old. You cannot go underneath that for any reason whatsoever. And I allowed myself to do that, figuring, well, they look like they're old enough. And that caught up with me, thankfully, absolutely thankfully, because it was the impetus to go get help for my alcoholism, go get help for my porn addiction. And in the end, I ended up serving 6 months in county jail for it, which is where I wrote the first draft of my book.
Holy shit. So what is going through your head? Like, what happens when the cops show up at your house about this? Like, what is going through your head, and what do they do? Do they ransack your house looking for evidence or something?
No. It was very different than I thought. But I was sitting at my kitchen table, getting some work done for the magazine before I headed into the office. This was probably 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and 3 cars and a van pulled up in front of my house. I knew immediately it was the police. There's no such thing as an unmarked car when they travel in packs like that. It was very obvious it was the police. I didn't know immediately what it was about. I like I said, if I was not involved in underground porn trading rings, I wasn't involved in anything that involved little kids. I didn't even think of what I was doing. So when they came to my door, I didn't know for the first couple seconds what it was. I was able to look down on the piece of paper he had, and he said, "I have a search warrant for your computers." Looked down on the piece of paper and saw enough keywords to figure out what it was. And within 20 seconds, I'd confessed to what I did. I knew they were going to find the evidence of those screen captures that I took. There was no question for me about that. And I was absolutely relieved. You know, at first I was scared, and I was scared and nervous throughout the whole thing, because you don't know how your life is going to, you know, be flipped upside down, especially somebody like me who was very well known in the community. Very nervous about that, but at the same time, very relieved that this was all coming to an end. That the night that I got arrested, and I'll back up in a second, but the night I got arrested, I got a call from the co-owners of the magazine, and they fired me. As the editor and publisher, and that was the best news I got all day. That actually felt like a weight came off my shoulders when it was just like, we don't want you back here, you can't come back. That was amazing, because this was a day of a lot of weights being lifted off my shoulders. I got arrested. I spoke to the police for about an hour and a half. They officially arrested me and brought me to the county sheriff's office, which is about 5 minutes from my house. And I was booked. I was only sitting there for about an hour. I called my wife on my cell phone. They let me have my cell phone in the police car on the way there. And I called her and I said, you need to go and, you know, get $500. I've been arrested. It was for looking at pornography that was underage. Don't worry if you're about little kids. It had nothing to do with that. But I went below, and she's like, you've had a problem with porn for a long time. And so she showed up about an hour later. First thing I said when I got into the car was, if you want to divorce me, I totally understand. I will not fight you on any of this. And she just asked again, was it little kids? And I said, no, it was a teenage girl who looked like she could pass for 18. And she's like, yeah, you're stupid. And I was like, yeah, I'm absolutely stupid. And I have no defense here. This was a horrible, horrible thing that I did. I let my mental health go to a place where this was possible. You know, 99.8% of my life, this never would have been possible. This would have been totally out of character. But I let myself go. I made bad decisions, and I take 100% ownership of what I did. She and I drove first to my office, which was
actually. I just want to jump in real quick, because at that moment when you're talking to her about this, I mean, yeah, you've had this huge bomb dropped on you. You know your life is going to change, but you haven't got any treatment or anything, obviously, at this point. It's still, you know, ground zero, basically. Are you, at this point, talking to your wife, like, already decided, I am going to own the shit out of this? Or are you still thinking, as, you know, a narcissist, that you can somehow, you know, finagle your way out of this with some smooth talking?
It's a combination of shock and wondering if I can use my narcissistic skills. Because this is, I was smart enough to recognize this was more major than anything else. I'd never sat inside a holding cell for anything stupid I'd done before. So this was stupid on a whole new level. This was consequences on a whole new level. I didn't know what was going to happen in the next 2 minutes, so I didn't really worry what was going to happen in the next 2 days or 2 weeks. Big piece of shock, with that little piece behind me wondering, am I going to be able to get out of this one? Do I have the skills to get out of this one? I quickly found the answer. The answer was no. I went to my office. This was literally an hour and a half after I was arrested. I walked in and only one person was there, the guy who designed our magazine. And he just says, "What the fuck did you do?" And I said, okay, what do you know? He's like, well, the Bangor News, which are the big papers in our state, they're already reporting on their website that you got arrested. And somebody was here from Sun Journal, which was our hometown newspaper. Somebody's already been here from the Sun Journal wanting some comments from us half an hour ago. Well, the moment I was arrested, the state police had a press release ready to send out because I was a whole high-profile guy. After I left the office and I told them, okay, well, I'm going to be gone for a while. We'll see what happens. My wife and I went back to my house. There was already a news van in front of the house. And so we left, went to my parents' house for a little while and talked to them, then went and got the kids at school, went back to our house at that point because there was no media there. But there were 2 times that night where we had to basically run from our living room to our bedroom. One of those times was the 10 o'clock news at night that did a live remote from our house. And we're watching the front of our house on our television in my bedroom, and our dog is standing on the couch barking at the people. And that's just some surreal stuff. I'm not thinking about, I need to go into treatment right now. I need to finagle my way out of this. It was just, it's so shocking. It's so surreal. I'm standing there and there's my house on TV and there's my dog on TV. And they're telling this horrible, heinous story about me. Up to that point, when I was featured in the media, everybody loved me. Everybody put me on a pedestal. And now it was like they're attaching a scarlet letter to me. And it was such a juxtapositioning of my life in the blink of an eye that it took some time to process. The next day, I met my lawyer for the first time. And he asked me right away, is this going to be a litigation game or is this going to be a sentencing game? As it's going to be all about sentencing. He, with the help of my wife, with the help of my father, who both attended the meeting with me, and basically said that I had quite an alcohol problem, because that's the only thing we thought it was at first, was alcohol. I went off to Palm Springs, California for what I thought was 4 weeks of me being told I was probably a bit of a problem drinker. Well, what happened was I ended up staying there for 10 weeks and finding out I had full-blown hardcore alcoholism. When I came back home, the legal process began. Legal process took 22 months to play out. During that time, I did a lot of one-on-one counseling. I did a lot of group therapy. I went for 7 weeks to an inpatient center in Texas for sex and porn addiction. I really got my shit together in those 22 months because I was able to work on my mental health full time. I had almost 2 years to work on my mental health full time. That was a gift that I could never have imagined. And I feel so bad for people who don't get 2 weeks or 2 months, much less 2 years, to figure out what caused them to get to the point they are in their life. How are they going to change? What tools do they need? And then relating to other people, which was a big issue of mine. Which the group therapy and the rehab certainly helped with. I ironically went to jail, almost 2 years after I was first arrested, a healthier, mentally more with it, emotionally stable person than I had ever been. And I saw a lot of those same people in jail who I saw in rehab, who just didn't have the resources to get help that the people did in rehab. And that was where I decided to write my book, because there's just nobody talking about porn addiction. And forget for a moment all of the statistics of how this is going to be a giant problem in the real world. On a one-on-one basis, I see how much pornography robbed from my life. I see how it affected my relationships with females from the word go. I see how it replaced actual intimacy and vulnerability with females from the word go. I see how it replaced physical intimacy from the word go. Nobody in pornography ever says no to you. In pornography, the person is new every night. It's a male fantasy, and that was such faulty thinking and such poor coping skills dealing with life. But again, I was working with the coping skills of a 5-year-old boy, and thank God that's not the case anymore. I mean, I am so grateful for the changes in my life, and that's part of what my book is about: is to stop. Either to show people who are not addicts of pornography that there is no stereotypical type. It's not a 20-year-old guy in his mom's basement who's never kissed a girl in real life. Porn addicts are doctors and teachers and lawyers, and you're absolutely, across the board. It's everybody. And it's also, I wrote this book also to try to get the person who may be in the early stages of porn addiction or in the ongoing stages, but before it gets critical, my story is, hey, look where this can go. My addiction got so bad, it got criminal. And much like the heroin addict who steals from their grandmother to get money for drugs, or the gambling addict who loses his house and the kids' college money because they have to increasingly have their addiction be fed through nefarious means, that can help happen with pornography. So if somebody reads this who thinks they may have an issue or knows they have an issue, hopefully this is a warning sign to them, and hopefully I'm a cautionary tale.
Yeah, that's what a incredible gift you're giving people by sharing your story. So I wanted to ask you just one last question. It's because it's something I'm quite curious about. So you hear this, you always hear these stories about when you go to jail, and obviously I understand the context of your story, but I feel like people that maybe are in jail wouldn't be so discerning or nuanced. So do you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to jail as a child pornographer and I'm going to get fucked when I'm like, not like literally, but I mean, I'm toast when I get there? Like, was that a thought that was
Oh,
going through your head?
of course. I'm going to get raped in the shower. I'm going to, people are going to beat me up every day. This is going to be, I'll be lucky if I survive. What happens when I get into a fight? All of these, the prison film industry does a lot to make us think,
Yeah.
think certain things. When in Maine, if you are sentenced to less than 9 months, you go to county jail, not prison. So I can't speak about the prison system in Maine.
Right.
I was in county jail. In county jail, most of the people who were there for probation violations, usually having to do with drugs or domestic abuse. There are also quite a few people who come through the doors who now have child pornography or some kind of sex crime. I was certainly not the only person I ever met. So I think that as part of the culture of inmates, there's starting to be more and more of those. And not that it's necessarily accepted, but it's just starting to become the norm. I also learned from a friend who had been to jail for a similar charge. When you get there, immediately asked to be put in protective custody. Protective custody is basically where you're not allowed to go anywhere in the jail without a guard. You're only put with other inmates who are under protective custody. The guys who are under protective custody were mostly guys like me, 30s, 40s, 50s, who didn't want to be bothered, who just wanted to either do their time or await their trial in peace. And I was put into minimum security, which in jail, there's not a tremendous difference between the security levels until you get up to maximum. But when I got to jail, I thought to myself, I'm going to write a book about being in jail. But the truth is, being in a minimum security jail in Maine under protective custody doesn't yield a lot of exciting stories. Mostly it was guys sitting around playing cards, watching TV, reading, a lot of sleeping, pacing. It was it. I tell people it wasn't hard time, and I don't want to say that as in I could do it again, because I would never want to do it again. It wasn't hard time. It was very long time. Um, I had to have my mental health meds tweaked a bit because something like Ativan, which I was on at the time, I couldn't take in jail because they don't allow opioids to be taken by any of the inmates. So I was there, and the most fascinating thing I've found, and we're coming up here on 2 years from the day that I went into jail. The 6 months I was there, I have forgotten so much about what happened. I have forgotten so many people's names, and it doesn't feel like it was 6 months. It doesn't feel like it was 6 weeks. It doesn't feel like it was 6 years. I look back on that time, and I have no way to measure it. I think that something within my body and my head somehow did detach a little bit, and dealt with a traumatic situation by detaching, much like I did when I was a little kid. I look back on jail now, and it's I don't have horrible feelings. I don't have good feelings. I have very few feelings because it's like I've wiped it from my mind. I have to work hard to remember things that happened there. I'd never be able to write a book about my time in jail because so much of it has been wiped from my mind. And I think that may just be a survival mechanism or a coping mechanism that's left over from being a kid. But if you're going off to jail, just, mind your manners. You can be totally honest about why you're there. And people have seen it all. People have heard it all. There's always going to be somebody who's worse than you. Just try to make the best of the situation. You've got a lot of time to think. You've got a lot of time to read. You've got a lot of time to write. You've got a lot of time to better yourself. There are a lot of people who waste it playing spades. I tried to use it for good things. I wrote 4 books while I was in there. I probably read another 20. It was a time of great reflection for me. It was a time of punishment, and I think that it is a critical part of my overall recovery.
That's such a great way to look at it. And I think maybe part of where the memories go, I mean, why they're hard to pin down some of the memories is because I've experienced this too. And I think it's as we experience these events and we start to undergo these fundamental changes, I don't know, for me, I look at my life in terms of, right now I'm much more forward looking. So I don't spend so much time thinking about the past. It still happens, but I look back on this period of my life and I honestly, obviously it's the same physical person,
Right.
but in every other way, I'm a different person than I was at that time. And sometimes it's hard to relate to that guy,
Well,
so I look back and it's almost like I'm reading or telling somebody else's
I
story.
have said that so many times. My book right now is 91,000 words. The version that I wrote in jail, and I had to write this into composition books with miniature golf pencils. It was a trying experience. I wrote over 200,000 words. I cut it down to about 120,000, and then I actually decided to scrap about 50,000 of them and write another 30. So I probably wrote for this book total 250,000 words, of which there are 90,000 there now. It was writing and rewriting, editing and re-editing, adding pieces, taking them away, to the point where I have read and seen this story so many times, it does feel like almost like not a character, but just another lifetime. It was a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime away. I think writing it and editing it have really helped me deal and come to terms with so much of it because it's been in my face for the last 18 months as I've been prepping the book and getting it out there. It's allowed me to talk about it with so many people over the last few weeks as I've been promoting the book. And I'm hoping that moving forward, I'm never going to get a counselor's certification or any kind of therapist degree. That's really not who I am. But I'm hoping that moving forward, I can somehow figure out a way to be a voice for people who either don't understand the addiction or for people who are in the early stages, and hopefully get them some help. Because, like I said, between my personal experience going through this and just seeing where we're headed as society, something needs to be done here. And I know almost everybody I've come in touch with who has a pornography addiction would never want to do what I'm doing because of all the shame and embarrassment that comes with it. And I still have a ton of that. And I still don't minimize or rationalize what I did. But because of my standing in the community, anybody listening here can go pop my name into Google and learn everything about my case. I was very publicly outed with the details. I have nothing to hide, or even more, I can't hide anything. So I've realized that since I can't hide anything, I might as well be a voice for this, and I might as well come out and try to do some good, because I took from people for so long, and I was an insufferable asshole for so long, and I treated myself horribly for so long. Maybe I can spend the second half of my life repenting and making up for it, and hopefully the second half of my life, when whoever keeps the score at the end of life, hopefully the second half of my life has a bigger positive score than the first half had a negative score.
I love it, man. Well, listen, I give you a ton of credit for taking what could be, and is, I'm sure, an incredible source of shame and hurt, and using that in the service of other people. Those are the stories that I love the most. It's funny. I end every podcast by saying, if you've struggled, I want you to know that I've struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I won't judge you. And I really feel like that's exactly what you're doing here. And the safety that you are going to create for people who feel like we all feel when we struggle, like I am the only person dealing with this. Your story and your voice and your book are going to help people realize that that's not true. And I really, really believe that that's one of the greatest gifts that one human being can give to another. So I give you a ton of credit, and I'm so happy that you came on the show and that we had the chance to talk, man. So
Thanks.
for people that want to find out more about the book, and sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to stress that the book is truly a memoir. It's not a self-help book. You're not going to be pounded over the head with statistics. I don't do that in the book. The book is really just one guy's story, so it's accessible to everybody. And if you need more information about pornography, or you want to know more about my recovery journey, I do have a website at recoveringpornaddict.com, where after you're done with the book, or even if you don't purchase the book, and you're looking for some kind of resources or some kind of personal stories from somebody, come to recoveringpornaddict.com and you'll find it there.
Awesome, brother. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes page. And again, I want to say thank you for having the courage to share your story and for being a guest on the Mental Health Warriors podcast. And I wish you and your book all the success in the world, my friend.
Thank you so much. And thank you for giving not just me, but so many people a platform to be able to step forward. It's one thing I appreciate being called brave doing this, but I'm a messenger. We also need the medium. You're providing the medium. So thank you very much for that.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right. Bye now.
Well, that was quite a story, wasn't it? Man, it's funny. When I do these podcasts, I often wonder at the beginning, I sometimes get butterflies in my stomach, and I wonder, am I going to be able to fill up, quote, fill up enough time with this guest, because I don't know them and I don't know how they communicate. Well, sometimes I know them, but a lot of times I don't know how they communicate. And I'm sometimes thinking like, am I going to be able to fill up enough time, or is it going to be like all awkward and weird? And do I possess the conversational skills that I need to keep the conversation flowing? And it's always the other way around, where I'm like, I look at the clock and I'm like, holy shit, man, I got to let this guy get back to, or this person get back to their life and, wrap up this podcast. But ultimately, one thing I would love to do is get to the point where I have the time and the freedom to do like 2-3 hour conversations with people, because there's so many layers of the onion that we can peel back. And I love going deep with people and hearing their stories and asking, whatever questions come to my mind and just being genuinely curious. So, Josh, listen, man, anything I can do to support you, I will do that. Your story is super powerful. And I learned a lot by talking to you. And I just, as I always say, I love these stories where, people take their greatest source of shame and all that and turn it into some vehicle or medium for the service of other people. So keep up the great work, brother. And thank you for having the courage to tell this important story, because a hell of a lot of people need to hear it. And I'm going to end this podcast just like I end every single podcast. And that's by saying, I've struggled. You know what? I actually cannot remember my little tagline here. Oh yeah. If you're struggling, I want you to know, sometimes you have a brain fart at the most inopportune times. That happens to me frequently. So let me try this again. If you're struggling, I want you to know that I've struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I won't fucking judge you. There's no way I'll judge you. Okay. So listen, you have a story. Everybody's got a story. Consider sharing it, because it's just a beautiful gift that you can give to somebody else, and you become super positively powerful and influential and more capable of creating the life you want when you start being that person. Okay, so consider giving somebody else the gift of safety and human connection. And we'll see you next time.